from the ocean of cyclic existence perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, foreland, sun, and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam I take refuge until I am awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I am awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I am awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Do you remember?
Pas d'exemple.
200. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Do it. No problem. Do it. Yes. Oh yeah. Oh, this Sanjay Chumdende. Tebe some because some good. No, Tebachi education. Tebe Chunam Shibar in Jose. Tebachi Valitan and Chukanga, Shingirwa, Teba Majani Shingmato. Tebe Tigland over Tebas and Maimba, Sosogi, Yamlicha Vinani, Tiba Miguel to the park, what to the Tugiro. Tebe Tigland over Tebe Temaimba Pans, that Temaimba. Merunga Samatam Jitini, Pungit Sponsor Resora, Taradendra Combalatene, Yandiando Combalatene, Yangelin Debatova Chigre Songudua, Yenduko, Teba Sanjay Chui Nedra, Langdurgine, Tembe, Chutus Tambusus, education, but es Matanani Shingmato, and Machinani Langdurche to Yungmato. Turn Langdurche by Latene Rimbi. And in young Ellen Devate, Tunge, Nesonge Tungelen Deva, Koya Tungelen Deva la Soba, young Eddie Tungele Yosu, Deve Tarvala Soba, talk to the Esonguda. Yeah. Oh, teaches.
So here, to begin with, from a collection of sayings by the Buddha, the Bhagavan, emphasizing the importance of hearing, of learning by hearing, it says that by hearing one knows the Dharma. So it isn't impossible to know unless one actually hears the teachings. And based upon that, we don't just gain knowledge, but we can avert from, turn away from that which is non-virtuous by knowing what is virtuous and non-virtuous. virtuous. One can get rid of that which is non-virtuous. And by hearing, one is able to abandon that which is meaningless or everything that is unsuitable. By knowing what is right and wrong, one can thereby get rid of that which is not suitable or not right. And by hearing, one is ultimately able to attain nirvana by improving, by developing that knowledge that one gains, by understanding the points of what is to be adopted and what is to be abandoned. That is the way that one can, in sequence, attain these kinds of attainments. If you don't hear, if you don't learn about these things, then it's impossible to progress in this way. It is based upon our hearing, our knowledge, that we can improve in stages and slowly, sequentially, be able to pass beyond the suffering of the lower realms, be able to pass beyond the suffering of samsara and so forth. So here, it's incredibly important to learn, to hear.
Oh yeah. Oh, that when I sit in the young Sanjay, the needle song to our castle. Oh, gosh. Tebe somsura, tebe somle, Sanjay Sungudua, tebe somlera. Tebe Majena and Nishan Tugumare Sungudua, Pechan Sungudua, Chida Kimli Levio Bess, Kimdi Toga Kangba, Toga Yabuche, Yoshan, and Nagu Chagua, Chida Kimli Levio Be, Mimbe Kebe Nangshu, Ben Nagu, Nalol, Mimbe King, Nalola Chimba Sura. Mi yongeng lo du yongeng mi ti kangbe na lo chimbe na su gara min be kek be na shu na su na ye ba ju ja ne min den shin do me to ase su da chala ma bu yo de ti so so thon ye ge ta chi ge shi ra bi yo de te dan da thong ma re su gara ti me to de kar chen thong ge ma so do he me sa ti thong ge ma do che za ko ti na shin su ga do min be ke be na shu na ro Sunam Yeva Georgiani, Mig Dancing do Metongas. So Taji, Mig Yore, Shirab Yore, Tanda Togumare Sungara, Mig Dancing do Metongas. O Tagana Shin Sungura, Tipechane, Tishin Dina Riki Besse, Tishin do Rigi Busa and Shirwa, Chegi, Gawadan Denge, Tarwa Tobe Gawadan Denge, Tarwa Tobe Riki Gawadan Denge, Sanjay Yukovan Tobe Rigi Gawadan Denge. Rigibu Sunguduanga Namju. Tishin Dina Rigibe, Mini Lodun Dangerous, Coloto Shea, Tabachigan Shea, Nuba Yore, Shiro. Tishin Dina Rigibe, Mini Sigura, Middle Mini Lodun Dangerous. Shiche ne to Shea, Lotu than Nuba Yores, Lotu Shiro than Damperes, or and the castle, Lodun Danjuya. The Guadan and Kivish, Matu Pato Sheman, you say. Coloto Yeva in a Tambuchi, turn a mato towers around Shinkisha Yongumardo. When you care about that, as you share Shabe, song to Terson and this, so Lodu is a shetu would know. But Tandruda Geneco, Passion and Shentuagi, Niva Yomardo, Lotun Dengimardo. Says Lodun Danjurians in Casara. This the Guadan and Kivish, Matu Pato Sheman, you say. The Tabacation Buddhist, Taba determination is Ogara. Now, when I draw a Chalamabu in a Taba Yuna, and a social shirviority, did some tonto Gudese. Tebe tremid the man, a tonto Gumares on Gordo. Did she get and take which Matu by the shame in yours? Oh, Jenny. Mean them, Mammy, you by Tiba the Chilam Natam Gorda.
No. So,
Yeah.
no. Here again, quoting from the teachings of the Buddha, this compendium of sayings, without hearing, if we don't hear the Dharma, then we're unable to sort of know virtue from non-virtue, for example. So here it gives this example of like if you have a house, all of this, the roof is sort of covered over, such that the inside of the house is completely dark. There's no light inside. And so although there might be all kinds of various things inside inside of this house because it is enveloped in darkness. So this verse continues talking about giving this example that like a person in a house that is completely enveloped in darkness, even if there are forms inside, so things, all kinds of things inside of this house, and even if it is sort of a child of the lineage, we often hear this in sutras and so forth, someone who has the fortune, has the ability to be able to, say, attain liberation, has the ability to be able to attain Buddhahood. If it is someone who has that kind of fortune, has this sort of a good lineage as well, it continues, is intelligent. So this person, it's not that they don't have the ability to, say, distinguish right from wrong, virtue from non-virtue, but they haven't been instructed. So if this person who is a child of the lineage, who is intelligent, but until they hear about the Dharma of virtue and non-virtue, they're not able to know it. So it's like a person who, although they are sighted, walks into a completely dark house and is unable to distinguish any sort of forms without hearing about these things. Although one has that kind of potential to be able to understand what one should and shouldn't do, unless you have gained that kind of knowledge, it's like being a sighted person in a dark space without any kind of a lamp to illuminate everything. If you had a lamp, you would be able to see whatever it is that is in that dark room.
Oh yeah, Mishiba, Tapechara, Mingde Mame Yoba Yeseta, Migdan Dembachera, Tayag Shirab Yobache, Marmej Seji Shirala Yoba Yena, Seji Mame Chirang Tremici, Kilagua Kiji, Yamto Yoba Yena Sigurdo. Oh, Tishi Garsura, Mingde Mame Yoba, and Garsura. Migdan Dembachera, Manme Yobache, Seji Manme Yobache. Mingde Mame Yoba Yese, Sunam Tongachidani, Nagun Kamba Nagudin and Rona, Kari Yobachala Sama Tonta Gurachera, Sunam Tongachidawa. Tishin Keda Tigbeche, Tebe number Shebanjus, oh, Denashi, Lanja Kari Cheku, Dorja Kari, Susu Sendi, Lanja, Devarchebe, Lanja Kari, Dorja Kari, Degi Kiwachima Penjele. Peg, Lanja the Dorja Karim Bati, or Tebachanani Shingri Sungura, Dran Mami Yavana Shere, Tebe Tremisuda, Tebatimu Missu Tremi in Shera, or Tindico Tremination is, or Tebe Tremi the Ranga Yona, Ran Shirab Tavi Shirab the Yavra, and the Kangaton to Brese, Kambanaguna Drongedi, Mami Yona Kangaton to Urasere. Mami Mana so Migdan Dembe Shirab. Tavi never yona yako ken teba medi shit Tokyo mat no medi or tinashi or teba de termination che or tinigasre. Mende tishi get anti wish tebe number shepherd use. What is Lamaya?
No. So here, putting forth this kind of example, again, of someone who's like in a dark house and has the sort of sight to be able to see, but is without a lamp. Here it continues saying, someone who is sighted and who has a butter lamp, like how they would be able to see forms within that kind of a dark house. Likewise, it is from hearing, from learning, that we can distinguish and know virtue from non-virtue. So here, when you have someone who is sighted, who has that kind of ability and intelligence, and is also carrying a lamp in their hand when they go into, say, a dark space, that illuminates everything that is around them. And so too, when we have the kind of wisdom that knows what it is, we have the learning that knows what it is we should take up into practice, what it is that should be avoided, what it is that we should be doing if we want to gain a good result in the future, and so forth. It is based upon that kind of knowledge of what is to be practiced and what is to be abandoned, that is like a lamp that illuminates everything around us. So while one might have the kind of potential in terms of one's own intelligence, if you are lacking that lamp of learning, of hearing, without that kind of condition, one is unable to really distinguish all of those things. So this here emphasizes the importance of having learning, of having hearing, by likening it to someone who is sighted but also has that lamp.
Oh yeah. Tisonjaco Tebechigini, Langdori Neto, the shit of Grace or Tebechin of Shiver Justal and Rosa. Oh, they didn't so dinner. Somebody in the Tebada Samba Combasce, Nangbagi, the Nitosam Kumsons and Rachel Lobson Chedande. Terson and Drison said targets over Mardo. Teba something to you, and it did something to you, Marva. Tebechella Samba Ase. So Samlutan Guyara. Kingone Reda Marese. The Pendo Yubachi Reda Mare Samsa, Samlutan. Or the which so Shensona. Some Jungi should have Sigurno. Some Jungs are doing Resha some. Tebechona Shiban, you Tebe Tillian Dogwache. Tebe tema yemba panse. O tishe sunani tena shilandur chebeyina. O tati pene kibu chungura shina mikiwa chute sendina kiwa chima ranglia neba jenge de redo asam. O ti pangbade sendila de chimala dewa redo asam sa. Kibu ndiginda shina o chakdan de kowa kiwe kyu redo asam. Chakdan pansuna tarwa togu do asam. Kibuchimburachina or Simjan Tamjak Tunda Chukuto, Ranchik Butunda Samlutana, Digmedo Samsa Samlukanga Corne, Dinashi Landurche would Esungora, and a Tibetilian dog was a Tibetima, Tibetan young and Debatovas and a tar, Tungetam Jel and Debe young and Debatovas Sigris Oda, yeah, this one.
So here it is by hearing, by learning, that we are able to know the points of what it is we should take up into practice and what it is we should avoid. So these kind of three, this hearing, first hearing, and then contemplating that meaning, and then meditating on it. This is the way in which we proceed, develop wisdom within the context of Buddhist practice. So just hearing, that itself is not sufficient. We need to then contemplate, think for ourselves, is this correct? Is this right? Is this something that is beneficial, or is this not beneficial? And thereby we develop the kind of wisdom arising through contemplation, through our own kind of reflection. So again, as this verse says, by hearing one knows the Dharma. By hearing you turn away from that which is non-virtuous and abandon that which is not meaningful. By hearing you attain nirvana. So it is by this kind of hearing that we know what will harm us both now and in our future lives, what is going to bring about good results in the future. And going beyond that, the sort of small scope thinking, one thinks along the lines of a being of middling capacity, that it is attachment and aversion that will lead to further rebirth. Those are the kinds of things that should be abandoned if we want to gain liberation from samsara. And thinking beyond that, oh, well, it's not just me who is in this kind of samsaric situation, but I want to benefit all sentient beings that are likewise in this kind of situation. So again, it is through these kinds of stages, by having this sort of knowledge, that one is able to proceed in this way. If you don't have hearing, none of the rest of this can come about.
Oh yeah, it is on Yagi Songudwa. Sibe Songu Chuchi Lam Yan Kija Namla Tess. Siba Koage. Yasongutunga in the Koetunga in the Hotel Samatam Japan Mabas or Chuchi Tabdi. May Kanzula 10 years on Gurwa. Dorchate Terry Langet in the Res Japa. Sibe Songa Chuchi, Songa Tunga Chuchi Lam de Kijal 10 years on Gudwa. Sibe Songa Chuchi Lam Yan Kija Namla Tess. The Shinshik Batamba de Sanjag Gans of Urwata. Sanjag and Jacque de Caris, Korang and Yamson, Musum de Kenji, Rang and Yamu Yungedi, Kanzul Batan, Ting a Lagares and Gora. Sibes on which you can catch a namlatan. The Shinshik Batamba de S. Some my king Sanjag, Gabamabu, and it was top the Shirley Combat and a thunder tarshim by Kembate. That Kanzul Tande. Landorina Chinji Maloba Tande. Did the Shinshik Banamji. Tanganzu Midamas Langate Res on Gora. The Shinshik Batamba de S. Don't get it so Tubaja, Sambeton, or Samlutan, Yana on the completion, social chair with a on Gora. Tishinshik Batamba de Kitchen of the Chakra sauce. Oh, did you love me? Yeah.
So, as the Buddha has said, the path that cuts the sufferings of samsara, this is what I teach to you. So, again, the kind of path that eliminates the sufferings of samsara, that is what the Buddha teaches. The Buddha's activity is to teach to others what he himself realized based upon his own experience over a long period of time, over many eons of training in method and wisdom and bringing them to their perfection. The Buddha then teaches to others based upon that kind of understanding that he has gained. But again, the Buddha, his activity is to teach to others, but you, the individual, has to do for yourself. The Buddha is giving the kind of knowledge based upon his own experience. But again, the Buddha is not able to do it for us. We have to do for ourselves based upon what we hear.
근데 소소 냠스 말라나 안에 tö버데야 단다 첨부 연구 말도 근데 산지 성구도 봐서래 내내 랍도 상부 최시야야스 로 내내 랍도 상부 최시야야 kö기 töne 양다 맞잖아스 내 신도 사회 최 랑도 친지 말로보다 교를 셰여 예순거라 뒤쳐줄 셰여 예순거라 내내 랍도 상부 최시야야 kö기 töne 뒤쳐 계란 속에 töne samlutane 아니 줄에 랑도르체네 소소 냠레 마셔나 순거라 얘네 랍도 상부 최셔야 kö기 töne 양다 마셔나스 줄에 랑체네 tö바 상부 공부체네 배주체네 공부에서 tö바 상 마셔서 랑도 제고래서라 얘네 랍도 상부 kö기 töne 양다 마셔나스 롱 마셔나스 오라 줄에 디나시 마셔나스 kö기 töne 양다 마셔 never mengi keba tawbata tag nene somenish never de pena min never sabchin bushi naza sabchin bushi nagibisha ta ko kale ken member yabuchi tengu do samchese member keba pe yabushi bujira ane member de pe pe yabu itabu yabuchi ne de sotunge men de ten ro ta korango men tila ane men ko keba ka tobu ka ju chane ko nyaje te mato masena ne ko pendo ke umare sungura daga nene swami abale sung oti de kasore men de soso sagore sura rabdo nene rabdo sambu choshe ye kyone yanda majena neba mengi keba toba da daga nene swami nishes member keba de sene statina done ngudo member keba sen ko me ya buto zo ta ro tanda soso ne lo ma chena peng mare songdo member manye resti member ke mare mengi ke mare ro nga zo khashi de ro soso chi ta keba ke ru mu do ke peng me do se yora peng me de soso ke nyamlim ma chen peng maro ye ke de soso nyamsu mala za peng yo mardo just timbe ke mare mengi ke mare never kora ke mendi ya uma sesa ne tra yo marwa membe mani mengi mani te never thinking never so o te chi so ya
So here again, if we don't practice, the Buddha has taught this most excellent kind of dharma. But if we don't practice it, then there's no way that we can actually benefit from it. So here, the Buddha himself has said that even though I teach this highest dharma, this greatest kind of best dharma, if you don't actually implement it or put it into practice, then there's no way that it will be beneficial. So the Buddha teaches without any kind of deception all of the points of what is to be adopted and what is to be abandoned. But if upon hearing this, we just sort of leave it at that, we don't actually implement it or take it up into practice, then there's no way that we can benefit from this. We have to actually put it into practice in order to get the kind of benefit from these teachings. So as the Buddha continues to explain, it's like if we don't practice the teachings that the Buddha has given, it's like someone who has an extreme kind kind of illness, who was very sick. And so they take a great deal of effort to find the most skilled kind of physician, the best sort of doctor. And the doctor tells them, okay, you need to take this medicine, you need to do this and this and this. And instead of actually doing any of those things, the patient just sort of takes the medicine and holds on to it. Then you're not going to get better. You're not going to heal from that illness. And so here, again, the Buddha is giving us all of the kind of medicine, the sort of most skilled and knowledgeable kind of doctor is giving us these instructions. But if we don't put them into practice, then there's no way that we can become better from this kind of disease. So if we don't benefit from the teachings, it's not the case like the patient that just sort of holds on to their medicine. It's not the fault of the doctor. It's not the fault of the medicine, but it's the fault of the patient themselves for not actually taking their medicine as they should. And so too, if we look at the Dharma and think like, oh, this doesn't actually work or it's not beneficial, it's really because we're not properly implementing it, not because something is wrong with the medicine.
Oh yeah. Oh, then yeah, Sanjay te songudwa. Hasam kuyan dona lo songudwa. Oh, then got some person. Teba janjan cheyade, teba de Puramge Purshin Yara, Puram Sing Sugudwa, Puram Swag Sing Chimbuya Gigdwa, the Pakba de Shuja, and Nalo de Sanangamuyora, Pakba de Latangamuyo Marwa. The Chilo Pakba de Teba de Chilo Pakba de Nashir Sogora. Sambada Combache, de Comdice, de Naloge, Puram Namu Rongonet Nashir Sogora. Or T. Indico didn't draw a race. Tebe Janjan Masha, Tebe and Sambache Yana and the social Laliltani, Yamliche Gure, and Shine Rod Sorgure, Churgi Karsoda, Tenda social Pembata or Kariabati Shine Sorgure Songudwa. The Lasam Kundana Songudwa. Then Puram Shinshu Nimbuchi and Mess Puramgi Chilo Pagwatelia, and the Army Nimbuke Kage Omares, Tebatel Songora, Tebatsam Delia. Puram Shinshu Nimbuchi and Mess. Now I see running Nana Dosa, Namone de Nalog, Teba de Party, Cheles, Combache and Yando, Purshin Nalo de Langamo de Yoresogora. Now I see running Nana Dosora. Puram Shinshu Nimbuchi and Me, Kawarche running Nana Dos, Narmo, Kabuyak, and Narme Rode Nalo de Yores, Kawarche running Nana Dosera. Shimba Swibe Mini. Puram Rose, Shimba Janjan, go Kodena, the Nalog Puram Rode, near Togumare Songora, Kumji Majena, Shimba Swibe Mini, Puram Ro, Shimbu Niba Nuba Mayanose, or the Ragmares, Social Pendo de Umare, Chigo, Tatich and Alpendo, Sosos and Joan Rashora, or the Rugmare Songora, Shimbu Niba Yomana. Chidare Shimba de Shimado, the Mawa, Sheba Yambade, Shimba Nation de Rese, Tambuti, Shimba de Gorba, Shimba de Nipasha, Nalo Dakar, Dotan Yibati, Nalo de Dogorba, or Dil Machin and Dumaresore. Chidare Shimba de Shimawade, Roda Bonetella Tansim Yese, Roda Tella Tanda de Samlutan, Tinashi Rangan Yamlechiade. And you roll no and I said, yes, or Roda Bonetella Tansim yes, or Chidashimba de Shima, the Roda Bonetella Tansim yes. The Davana Malaka Ponte, Ma Chibulaka, Tagat Simbachin and Mateas Ungora, Malaka Ponte. And Tado, Pagicella, there some shares, Tado Be, Subso General, Langjakare, Torchakare, Yabushimba Nashi. Langdo Yabuche, so subsoche, Tandastilia, Yamliche, Tapsiche, or Sungudwa. Oh, teach Lana. Yeah.
So here in another sutra by the Buddha, I think it's called like a sort of encouraging one towards the special attitude, the superior attitude. In this sutra, again, the Buddha describes how important it is not just to have hearing, but to really take that into practice, actually implement that. So hearing, or learning from hearing, is sort of like the skin, the peel on a sugar cane. So when we really want to taste that sweetness, the sweetness is really inside, and that's what comes when we engage in contemplation and meditation. That's where we get the sort of real flavor or the essence. So here this verse says that the sort of the peel of a sugar cane doesn't have that essence, that sweetness. That enjoyable flavor is inside. From just eating that peel, you're not going to find that desirable sugar cane kind of flavor. And so too, when it comes to our hearing, that's where we begin. But to really get that sweetness, the sort of essence of the Dharma, that comes through the kind of practice, engaging in what we have heard, actually implementing that, thinking about it, and putting it into practice. And so here, the desirable sort of sweetness is really inside. So we don't want to just stay on that level of the kind of peel where there's not really the true sweetness of that thing. So the Dharma will not be beneficial to us. We won't really get that real flavor if we just remain on this level of hearing about it and kind of being enthralled with the words, just talking about it, explaining it, and hearing it. But rather, we need to go beyond that. So here it continues by saying that getting rid of liking for just talking about things, one should always be careful or always have conscientiousness to think about the meaning, to really put that into practice. So here, again, we should get rid of the sort of liking just for the skin of the sugar cane. If we want to get to the real flavor of that, we need to have the kind of awareness, what it is that I should and shouldn't be doing, and put that into practice. That's how we're going to get the real taste of the Dharma, not just from hearing it alone.
Oh yeah. Oh, they got sort of so give chungo in and doing and the chimbo in and Pidan subject catch what the shake up was over there. So Yamli Church, the shake a couple get him medua, Ganga Shingdua. When they give you chungo Lunga Yesum Yukone, Shala Sever Rusukurba. Shami give us on Gay Lega Kaya Machi Songura. Shala Pant on a Chiniki Pandochi, never much yesterday. Tico Hamburger game and doa. That didn't see Yamli Chana. Teaching the Yamli Chana, did you write Joachimang, Maji Hada Miliki, let out a Sagiora. Imagine the Chunjura Sorjani, get on us, Yomara. The Niri Mesinalia, Ongone, Shala Sawa Jubatiba, Nugrisam, Shala Sawach and Nugrisam. Gawada trended to get a trend with some Lucone, Kultubuch and Digmarisam, Yabuyongurisam, Randa Chibarisam. And if Lunga Yesum Kwan Niri Mesinalia, Shala Sawa Pamba Trubchena. Yesum get Joakaya Juditi in some. Father meet our persons of Watoya Judy in some. And Mikachu won't get children song. Chimbala saw what the Shanda Kiwaka troop to Netrumna. Yerin Messina, Sushin the Trumna, Mission Daka, Chimadoke Remadua. Titaba some dash ashan, Magina, and Caping Mardo. O T and Duco Tabacang Masha, Cheche, Carsoda. Susan Yamlisha would hear some good. Nation wrote a genius or now should the pants on some Susan Messinalia, Joachim some similar. She did live some so wrote in Yonguada. The man tells you shan and Namunis, Chivakon, Namunis, now Lord Rock and Yongu Marke Pendo Yomarwa. Or Tisungudwa, or Tinduko, Kibuchuninated. Then I see Kibun drink the Chimbulangazu Pachashana, Kangatan the Chiandoa. Chagdam Maji Sundura. Ran Sasa Sosu Jamjamato Sam Yumagangazo, Konzo, Sosu Cholbe, Shenja Shuk Chimbuchangazu, Konzo, Chagdan Yuru, Pez, our Ned Mebasoto Marde, or Tiabore Medoa Samsa, Miri Inandra, Chulu Inandra, Karine, Lumba Inandra, Chichon, Nazuchi, Konzi, Sauranga, Sagachormata. And when they take Rungumare, Samsa Samble Nalishaguda, Chagdan Yuru Doa. So Luda Neda Luda by Shinjashira Shukimbuchaka or Marto. Or Tunisian Latose, Chagdan Yurutaya. The Kibu Church and a Cotidua. Kibuchimbuchu and the Tandangazin Yamlichi and Doa. Simjet Tamjet Awada to Simjet Saman washing the Simjet Tamjet, Simjet Saman washing until the pando to Tindachi to Echi or Marto. Sanje Drame was Chansarati, Simja Kanga Sanke Sauro Tazu Kangame, 그 투비에게 요 말도 내 소소응의 심지에 인바섬 심지에 인바섬 대완들을 동에 medebe 심지에 인바섬 삼을도 안에 어딜 또 부정 말에 야보 고그리 삼세 삼로 거라 뒤 삼로 짝기도 내 바로질 거 심지에 인바섬게 교생게 거 동해서야 대화 통되게 삼로다 배주시에 강경구라 개발 마치듯이 심지에 간제질리치 도가래 정보이나 뒤직벌한 게 지구 지냐 이ring다 개발 매개를 총선 심지에 탐지해서 했던 다티 연구하라 저 대응 가지고 냠리치 해놓고 시다하시는 마주나 지연도와 어디 넣고 어디 뒤부터 직송나 마우저로 쳐서 야 인데우지라
So here, whether of the small, the middling, or the great capacity, we need to really, I mean, this Dharma is very vast and extensive, and we can't necessarily practice everything immediately, like know everything immediately or practice it, but we should make that kind of effort to whatever it is that we learn about, actually put it into practice on a daily basis. So like beginning with the being of small capacity, recognizing that everything that is harmful to others are actions that we should avoid, that we should get rid of, and try as much as we can to benefit others through our actions, to do those things that are beneficial and helpful to others. So this is something that if we know it, if we have this kind of knowledge, we can actually take it up and put it into practice. But if we don't, if we just sort of leave it at the level of knowledge, or like, okay, yeah, I know that, but we don't actually put it into practice, there's no way we can reap the benefits that come from this. However, if on a daily basis we make an effort to avoid any kind of actions that cause harm to others and do as much as we can to benefit them, to do actions that are beneficial and useful to others, then we can ensure that we gain a good rebirth as a human or a god. If we can have this sort of attitude that looks at every sentient being and thinks they're just like me, they don't want to suffer, they want to have happiness, and in that kind of knowledge, we actually avoid any kind of action that would cause suffering to others. That's the way that we are going to be able to achieve a good rebirth in the future. But we need to do this on a daily basis. We need to actually take that knowledge that we have and implement it, not just sort of like leave it at the level of knowing it, sort of like being stuck on the peel of the sugar cane. Instead, to really taste the flavor of the Dharma, it's about actually implementing that, doing that in our practice. So here, if we just sort of are like, oh, I know that, but then we continue to act in the way that we always do, there's no benefit. We're not really getting the essence of the Dharma. And so too, going beyond the being of small capacity, those beings of, we can put down imprints regarding the being of middling capacity and great capacity, recognizing the faults that come from attachment and aversion, from having the sense of I and mine and our side and their side. We can work to get rid of that kind of attachment and aversion, recognizing the way in which we grasp onto the sense of our, like whether it's our type of people, our religion. If we're able to see the faults in that, we can slowly reduce the kind of attachment and aversion that we feel. We can create the imprints to achieve liberation from samsara. This is based upon that kind of knowledge. We can actually implement that in our life. And going beyond to the Mahayana Dharma, the Dharma that we are trying to practice now, we can develop the kind of, based upon our knowledge, that all sentient beings have the desire to be happy, and none of them wants to suffer. It's not as though we can go out and sort of introduce ourselves or get to know every single sentient being and free them individually, but based upon the kind of knowledge that by being a sentient being, no sentient being wants to suffer, and every sentient being wants to have happiness, and wishing in your own way to be able to work for the happiness of all sentient beings and reducing their suffering, we can, in our own way, develop this practice on a daily basis of actually implementing, taking up into practice the kind of actions that go along with that. So as much as we are able, we should try to do this, to really take up the essence of the Dharma, not just let it become mere words or sort of remain at the level of mere knowledge.
Oh yeah. 어다던다고 소소 단대치 투버데 강치 투버데 탑시 제제 배주 증개시고도 터버 코란 샤주면도 쌈리 샤주면도 니리니리 메시나리아 tebe tendelia so samluta o ti yane yandu ti tole kumdiche o tendeche udoa ane tanda che metobe samate maombale ya tendeche toba sho samsa membe yodu chene rimbi nge tendeche toba chigi samsa kyoane kyoa gyudi sanje komanse de tarang bu keje shege yorto o ti dinga maomba tendeche tongbe gyoa sho samsa molam jayeda maombala nge tendeche toba sho samsa chigi samsa o tende samlu che shagu yorto o de luka sore tatunda tanda nganzo teba chanjang shamna mandibure soyati yorto tingarazu te sadu tebe tende ane samjungda kumjung salmadana pangborawa shingi wade garazu tandarab tosi soso nyamnyong chane chosi lematuna pangborawa o ti chane ane teba de chiloge pakwana shire nyingbuke yo mare songi yorto nganzo teba chinge solya teba chebe tandade 냠술라네 지체 오르마도 테네 방보레 송교라 지단고 양 아주 가셨던데 것도 처레전에 건주 터바장제 셴마도 냠리 지금 말에 생겨서라 텐데셰도 막 카단서 소라 지기도 에너랍도 중간에 터바체 빼절 터바체 빼지장제 따대기는 고 터바사기오라 지수라체 시라고 터바체네 소소소 미키 주분 그 추림이나다 개sol로이나다 때 돈바데 송치 때요라 근데고 데 개심부터 냠을 지기 왔다 어떻게 천주 말와 계산기 때문에 생기 왔다 먼저 때문에 담주 남니 돼서 롱다 똑베 당니도 쓰기도 롱기 때문에 똑베 때문에 니라 롱기 때문에 제수도 롱기 때문에 소수파 셔야다 녀야다 아 좀베 담주 남니도 롱다 똑베 당니도 등진제바 마치다 주바시바 코나 송도 파시 녀 청년의 고요라 청년 매는 안에 생계 연구말은 생계 매는 지질 빼서 연구마도 더버 개심으로 참모 탐지 더버는 신남사 자중반의 시체 도구마로 참아 가 톱도디 지기지기야 더버시 언더해도 자고 더버디 지단코 산지 템번지 버려 빼개심으로 생계기 셔야돼 빼개심으로 산지 좀 된데 지된 감로 전에 송생계돼 균접시 반내로 전에 섬수수 파셔야돼 개심으로 연계주 내야돼 개심으로 템번징기어라 템번던 지역이어라 산지기 템번던 지어라 산지 가르송도 텐드송도 텐드치송 디마지송도 삼 템번던 지역이어라 데케바 삼부르도 대 산지기 템번징기어라 어디에나 아주 태바만 뭐 제체도 태바티 제베 던다데 냠리체 마셔비샤나 아니 방보레 태바데 던다케 요 마레세 다 텐드체 송교어마도 지다양 태바 가소레 개심부 많이 받아 텐드 송보다 탄테베 파이만 부송도 어디에 템베 탐주 남니테 롱다 똑베 당니도 텐지지바 마시다 주바시바 코나 오세요 쉐셴게 지기체 야부 태바체 냠리체기 지다야부레삼 산게 템번 생겨레삼 태바치기오레삼 야부레삼 미레셰기오레삼 쉐지 콜로스기도 쉐지 콜로스 꼬르세 던다레 다샤에 마레 지게 nye 수수nye 간토도 냠레체 셴달 파셰 야치디게 티제 두세제 쉐지 콜로스 코리아 던다레 마도 수수장제 셴냐데네 고초루라 템바 펠기마도 자티 개심부레 어이 텐데 손자 다던다 산제 손라 테바체 티 삼바 삼르다 야네안도 콤발레 테네 랑이 껴와치마 원도 라메 고바 토바체 라메 고바 토바자 마이바 텐도 기치치고베 동해에 텐도 타와치 자고서 대라치고 마이바 심제 탐제 파마교베 심제 탐제 아니 동해에 타와치 치네베 산제 고바 토바체가 예삼 교육에서 연대 군대기 강사진 주와체가 예삼 대치도 chuy년게 요삼 고로세다 안삼버서서 되거든.
So here, whatever it is that we have heard, we should try to implement, to actually put into practice on a daily basis, familiarize ourselves and get more experience with that, habituate ourselves to whatever practices we are able to implement on a daily basis from those things that we have heard, that we have learned. And those things that maybe we are not yet able to practice right now, we should hold on this level, in this level of aspiration, of thinking and making the kind of prayers and aspirations. May I be able to practice that in the future, holding them in that way, not as something that we won't do but can't do right now, and kind of are putting in that level of aspiration, because this is again a long-term kind of a goal. We're going to be striving birth after birth to be able to gain that state of Buddhahood, and so this is something where we need to think long-term. Again, here it is emphasizing that it's not suitable to really hold what we know, what we have learned, as just hearing, but rather we need to contemplate it and then meditate on it. If we don't use what we have heard, actually implement that and put it into practice, then it kind of becomes a waste. We need to try to have an experience, to put those things into practice such that it elicits some kind of experience, that we taste that flavor of the Dharma. So here, again, when we talk about sort of the importance of hearing the Dharma, and there are those that hear the Dharma and they are holding on to the Buddha's teachings. Again, the Buddha's teachings, the Dharma, are encompassed of the nature of the scriptures and realizations. And so it is like those who, by explaining and then, or so by hearing and then explaining to others, they are passing on, they are holding on to the Buddha's teachings. But it's very important that we recognize that it's not just sort of holding on to the teachings on that level that is important, but it's also important to accomplish them, to actually put them into practice in order to gain those kinds of realizations. So while it is said that again we need to first hearing the teachings, that is something that is a very auspicious kind of occasion. Those that hear the teachings and then based upon that hearing explain that to others, that's how we continue the Buddha's teachings. That's how people are able to meet with the Buddha's teachings and they're able to flourish and continue and so forth. But here again, while there are benefits to hearing the teachings, we don't want to just leave it at that level, but rather by holding on to the teachings through hearing them, we should then contemplate and then based upon that contemplation, meditate on that meaning and so forth. But it is through the explanation of the Dharma, by explaining it to another person, and we talk about the sort of wheel of the Dharma, where one is passing it on to another, and in that way, the kind of the teachings move along and continue. But we need to make sure that it doesn't just remain at that level, but we take the time to contemplate, to then implement those teachings that we have heard, such that based upon the teachings on virtue and non-virtue, we can strive to gain a good rebirth, and not just gain a good rebirth in the future, but to strive to gain liberation from this cycle of samsara, not just for ourselves, but for all mother and father sentient beings who are in this cycle of suffering. And so with that kind of contemplation, we should think, I want to strive to attain the state of Buddhahood, free from all faults, where I've developed all good qualities. And for this purpose, I'm going to not just listen to the Dharma, not just hear it, but actually try to put this into practice in order to strive toward that goal, in order to be able to benefit all sentient beings. So in that way, we should set our motivation for listening to the teachings.
Oh yeah. Well, 당연히 그것이 될래서 tenju에 내시 뉴글라 소벤 드비응어보 남 ng마와 남견 대바다를 타실라 속에 줄에 겨와 여바 마인베 라랑게 규용선 규르에 내급지 규인 땡이라 대부 델리착바라 라완 델리착바라 루브르 서준도 셰신바다를 인데에서도 당마마도 쪽에 대부 줄에 땡지 셰온도자 라와 어느 가서다 딱바치 샤에 딱바 줄만 보셔도와 그 딱바신 유로 맹게시로 양디 그런 숨도 통대게 던던 잡으시네야 대신에 그 통대게 규진 멤버 양신다지게 그런 삼르타니 깨고반다가 좋아 아니 뒤 딱바세르 지신다 규칙이 아끼고 요래 삼사 삼르티 말해서 거든 가도 된 무슨 통데 그날 깨는 때는 근데 기구나 어디 내신시시 기구 어레서 근데 공무마 저거 랑완도 줘봐 랑원에 줘봐 규치 째제니 지금 믹스에 규면다를 칠 때는야 깨와시기도 근데 그게 말해서 랑완도 줘봐 다 근데 규치 째는 때는 깨고 말해 대진 레버런 중아 규진 속발을 때네 아니 레부디 깨고 그래서 저 땡겨와다 뭐마니데 맨다 가르스네 뭐마 저게 뭐부 코나 깨와서도사 깨와서도 믹스하게 랑은에 깨와서 랑은 뭐 좋다 용게지 깨와 주단 깽게 랑원에 주베 주단 깽시게 랑원도 주변 제부디 수께 용아 실지 상무탄 거라 땡겨와잖아 랑원도 주베 교회가 말해 랑원도 주변 대부가 말이다 그 강가 규진 소방 아마 칠 때는 건 여러 전시키고 알아 들 랑원도 주버치 용해요 말아 그 되게 한 대부기 온데 랑원도 주베 수기게 하시고 말아 규진 소한도도 규대게 강가 소한도도 대부 코너 로버트야 태용 게시를 되어 알도 자 떼진데 버리 좋아 대섬지를 마도 랑원에 주바다 텐데 교요 말았어 내가 주 디나를 용기 바커 시작하서 제름 부신게 된지 때문에 연구도 와 강도 송외 집어남 탄증 청와 땡시 봐서 강도 송외 집어 시리발라 소방을 마올라 소바 태주 송거라 뭐 마와 태조게 뭐 버튼 좀 마와 태조게 강도 송외 집어남 탄증 청와 땡시 봐 규단 깬을 때네 깨워래 시도고 랑와도 줘봐 랑원에 줘봐 진짜질 때네 깨워래 시고 딱다대 랑원에 줘봐 랑신기 줘봐 진별로 되고 때문에 딴 거래 교단 깨알 때니 깨운 것도 왔거라 그러나 때니 태운 것도 태종게 시고 알았어 어떤데 섬을 딴 거라 그래서다 다 땡겨왔다 돼서 제나 강도 송외 집어남세 뭐 저도 송거래 집었어 강도 송외에서도 교단 깨알 때니 깨운데 랑원도 줘봐다 교미세 맨다지 랑원에 줘봐시 세야지 될 때니 깨고 알았어 근데 삼을 거고 알아 강도 송외 집어는 탄진 랑원도 줘봐지 봐 탄진반이 어떤 세다다 딱타야 펠게 알아 교단 깨알 때니 깨봐도 교생도 전에 랑원에 외고래도 교진을 깨우르시 알아 시루바가 시고래 때문 도대 받아 시라마다 남바이나 샘샘바다 저게 샹와 덴바 두고래서도 규진 현지왕의 중앙이나 덴바 두고 시켜고래서 라고요다 그래서 강도 송외 집안은 탄진 청와 땡지 봐 당진다 랑와도 두바데 바 템으로 당그려 레셔라 강도 송외 집 탄지셔야 돼 이니 켈러 두바에 자와만 르치고 이니 케바 엄마 땡겨왔다 보고 셔베나 교단 깨를 때네 깨운데 규진 속배왕의 코너를 봐 제부야 깨고 마던 제부 랑원에 속해서 말아 그러나 내가 가랑 주 용기에서 손을 깨시고 말해 저 강도 송에 집어남 탄신 덴바트로가 랑와도 주반 벤진부터 때로 딴 거래 교단 깨를 때네 깨와래서 땡지 되게 엄마 땡겨와래야 강도 송에 집은 탄신저 된지 니 켈러 주바에 자마를 쥐베고 케바 엄마바 따바에네 교단 깨를 때네 깨운데 랑원에 주베 매바데 랑원에 주베 딱사데 파세 교련 두고 알아 이니 켈러 주바에 자마를 쥐베고 랑와도 주베 각세 주바 랑와도 주바 랑원에 주베 주바데 파 쥐베 교련 두고 알아셔라 자고 삼단다 백화가래도 뭐마도 저게 교단 깨를 때네 깨기도 와서 고난 편에 규진 선이 추터용 것도 와서 덴바드바 랑원에 주바시 여고 그래서 랑와도 주바시 여고 그래서 가라 땡겨와 전에 땡지 레버는 줘서 때 매고 그래서 두고도 와 뒤질라나 디니켈러 주바에 자와말로 쥐베고서 야
No. So here, then picking up where we had left off in the text on the English on page 21, it says, unlike essentialists, consequentialists do not assert that all effects, sprouts, or anything else arise from causes such as the above mentioned four alternatives. Rather, they assert that an effect arises newly and suddenly from a stream of its specific ever-changing causes to which it is linked. So here above, we could see like essentialists, those that assert that there's some kind of a permanent cause, or that there's some kind of non-observable cause. Like if you have a harvest or something, the harvest comes about, but they would assert that there's like the sort of thinking, the intention of a divine being or something that leads to that coming about, or that there's some kind of permanent cause like time or something. So these essentialists, when we get into those that are within the Buddhist schools, they assert that there's some kind of cause that exists from its own side, that is existent in its own right, somehow autonomously existent or inherently existent, that gives rise to an effect that is of the same kind of nature. So consequentialists do not assert that any of these kinds of effects arise from such causes, but rather they assert that things are dependently originated, that an effect arises newly and suddenly from a stream of its specific ever-changing causes to which it is linked. So for the consequentialists, there's nothing that has a cause that is like existent from its own side, that somehow exists in its own right, is inherently existent, that gives rise to an effect that is inherently existent or autonomously existent from its own side. Rather, when all of the kinds of causes and conditions come together, then that particular result arises. That effect comes about adventitiously, newly and adventitiously based upon that. So here in J. Lama Tsongkhapa's praise to dependent origination, he describes this in a verse where he says, "By grasping at it, the childish strengthen bondage to extreme views." So the childish here are referring to those kind of like essentialists who assert dependent origination in such a way that causes exist from their own side, exist inherently. And this strengthens their view of some kind of permanence, some kind of eternalism. For example, even like the mind-only school asserts that the other power is truly existent or is existent from its own side. So their understanding of dependent origination actually causes them to strengthen their bondage to extreme views, in particular that extreme view of permanence. And so rather than being that which undermines that or gets rid of that grasping at inherent existence, it actually strengthens that. For the wise, though, this very fact is the doorway to cut free from the net of elaborations. But those who are skilled Madhyamikas, when they assert a dependent origination, that actually eliminates any kind of existence from its own side, autonomous existence. So their way of thinking is very different. An essentialist, as it says here, this childish kind of being, by grasping at it, the childish strengthen bondage to extreme views. For the wise, this very fact is the doorway to cut free from the net of elaborations. So the same kind of understanding, not same understanding, but this idea of dependent origination, misunderstood by essentialists, actually strengthens their bondage to extreme views. Whereas for those proper Madhyamikas, that is the very thing that cuts the net of elaborations.
Oh yeah. Ota tenda ko uma tenju to generwa. Tangbu ngo chu tu ne ko ngo ne lu ta chi pige. Ngo koran ketna kilu chora ngazu ngo sum do thon de shisha cheche. Di to ne ngo koran ne dan karire to ngazu samul tan dan karire to titawi ora. Drum ge sonde tangbu chi shanda chi so titina chi ji yengure sam karsore. Ngo sum do ma dung ge yichi lo yichi che yan dra de shege omare. Tangbu do ko ngo sum ge gyodan kyan le tene kedan kilo kandes kigodo. Jebu kandes chungudo te ngo sum do thon de shisha che. Gotsu se do ngo sum ne tokura. Ngo sum ge toba de tene ane yang shi ta da tendel ten samluta tar ngo ne tuwe de ngo sum do tuwe yo chi ko re chara. Ngo sum ge thon yang ngo chi ko yo re. Ana nga ju tarba tu se ya tu nyomo seba se takbare chi je to da one nyomo sebe sem de tu ko yo ra. Nyomo sebe sem de ngo bu chi tuwe yo ra. Sem le nyomo takbe sem de ya tu ko yo ra. 탑도 그 두제 대 공업부지 네 여바치 무슨 주요 여바치 구요라 근데 그 뭐그 내로 째야 돼 뭐 코란 규진 무슨도 통돼야 뒤터내야 째고 그래서거라 될 때는 대다 소수 삼로 땅땅데 테마도 삼로 땅데 대다 냠도 소수 셈다 안 좋아돼 맨 남주 삼로 땅데 진짜 땅도 다들 레면도 안 되는데 레도 삼 셈다 삼로 땅땅 뭐 봤다다 통당한테 자네 따고 알아 그래서 소수 심기도 된다고 그래 야 대대치라나 된다 그래 영어 뭐 도저 팀 다들 소래 말이야
No. So here, particularly for the prasangikas, the consequentialists, they really look at what we can see directly, how it is that things come into being, what is the nature of objects, of things. And it is based upon that kind of observation of the way that things are, that they come to present a kind of philosophy of that. Whereas it's not like some that might sort of put forth a story almost, or put forth like, oh, this is the way that things are, and then try to apply that to reality. But rather, the prasangika, this kind of logic and reasoning, really always comes back to direct perception. Although there are times when you use reasonings and put forth various logic and syllogisms and so forth, it really all goes back to establishing things with direct perceptions. So being able to like establish the mind that is freed from afflictions and so forth, we do so based upon our own direct observations. Establishing these various things is something that we do sort of in connection with observing the way that we normally think. So we can't do this outside of our sort of normal realm of thinking, but it needs to be connected with our own mind and the way that we think about things. And that's how we will actually create sort of change in our behavior and so forth. But this is something where the prasangika method is really, it always sort of touches back to that direct perception and using logic and reasoning in order to establish the way that things are.
뭐야 당한 저 디말로 신도 tenju ane nyugula sobe ngobo namsta tanda ngazo nyuguli charne shegi warati ngobo shenda kangal pa ring rene chikba samla tangura chi ngobo ina da nang ngobo ina da kyudan keltene kedan kilude chibore de ordo tenju ane nyugula sobe rebi ngobo namse ngobo mawa namjin deba dar tashila sobe kyule kewaran deba mayimbe ese dagi shenji niga kyumile kewa tezu kelingi omar tezu kangade Ramadu Trube Sene, Ramadu Trubachi Yokur Sam Sene, Kiletani Kebata, Kiletani Kebata, Ni Ramadu Trubachi Mani Kumebal Tene Kebata Sero, Tindishe or no. Oh, Rarangi Q Yonson Jure, but the Tenguachane, Rarangi Kudan Kento, Yonson Jure Negavlia, and then Kudan Drebu, Nielinda Lenges Kentesuke, Joer was a chedu, and in Drebu Kono Lubu de Atayon Kashiremado. Ramadu Chene Ramune Trubechi Yomardo. Negab Q Tinila, Drelle Chakwas, Tedan Drelne. Judan Candy and Drelne or Mother, Judan Candy Legacy, Kitchunga de Shandachi, Takbata Chikaki, draw Mabaji Ted and Gachi Omare. Judan King in Jurech and Jurenegam the Kormato Chiki, Takwe Jushandachi was and it take on figure dash and Juagachi Mukun and Drebudineki Omarwa or Tipaka Yorda. Junti and Drell Shapate and Drelne Drebuke for a battle. Could I get the Shampaju, Kitchunga Shandashi, Tendre Takbata, or Tendre Kelling Homato Tinguation. Junti and Drell Shapata, Drebulu Surgeon to share some butters. Could you sound to the Kemaji Yoma, Kora Rome, Bake Guardo? Could you Matsona cake with some like Yomardo? Or tea in the Naranzo Tower? Because it and do she was young with some Russia, she dead and Madulega Maja. Legamachani Yabu, Kujin, the Tapsi Majani, Yoga Marwa. As young Marwa says, Judan candy saw what I said, sent it to do in Edra. Tungan Dona Kanga say at Yucardo, Tewa in a tetu at Yucardo. Judy San and Drebuco, Jutsos on a drum of a Levgro. Jumasan and Yoga Marwa. Was a Jutu that she did in their young door. Or Judy Lambra say Yabuchi Chuna something. When they say so, you trade pay Yabuchi China, Yabu on your Rechera. 자야디 야부 장고로 티 삼루마다시 야부 용하나서 메요나 삼서 삼루다데 그러셔서 규디 소 사는 제부 용거래서 제부 용마요 삼루 당고 말에 규디 야부지 사셔는 용거래서 어디서요나 안델리샤보 고도셰스 바타리 인데스 주발레스 우마 주바카스로 간지르 규메 바다스 규메바 망게데라 장빈바차 원주 계세 줄라서다 원주 바시르바 원주 제버르셔야 되라 소다스다 원주 라속베 카셰 상베 제버르셔도 카셰 다텐데셔요노 소다 다게세 규 뒤수 제비 당기디에 에테네야 테야 제마우드 파 코란테네 파 팀드로텐데 삼루상도 다기디요 말에 셴레교와디요 말 온데 셴게셔야 될 것을라인 방아죠 개버스 송주면다 니요래 주단께 주셴레된 제부셴게와요 말에세 전당리 제베세 주셴 멜레테는 제부도와게와요 말에세 어텐들 파차다시요 얼도 안데디 말에 랑웨네 주베 주셴레테는 제부셴게와요 말에세 지송가 받아주는 데를 작으도 다시 니가래 아니 니가래 겨매셔 다시 니가래 니가래 주셔 주지 어이 그래 내려셔라 다시 니가래셔라 그러면 개원 좋아 많이 받듯이 때내라도 개원 주세요. 이래서 간지 주미 받아 와주게 졸라서다 다시 이거래. 뭐는 개원 좋아 많이 받듯이 때내라도 개원 주세. 저서 원데 벽해봐 양쪽 손주 떠서면다 연구도 와. 다지 샹지 이거래 개와 주미리 개와 신을 개와 강간 되버려 손주 지와래. 디나리 전담 제베세 디나리 개와 메두타 개와 요 말에서 지단 개와 가샤라 지단 개와 가샤레세 지단 개와 가네 매네 동백화는 검사는 되게 와레세 근데 손수 줘라 제송가 받던 전에 지단 개와 가보던 되게 말에서 거라 어느 가르세 다게 샹게 니가 주밀이 개와세 땡진 레버는 줘야 개와된 디나리 송도와 타실레 개와 매 마인베 디실 때네 랍도 개완 줘서 땡진 레버는 줘야 개와디 타시날 샤그만도와 타시날 샤나인데 다기 마이 샹기 마이 서와 우마죽발레 다다 샹레 같이 규미 받아라 규미 받아 같이 규미 받아 원주기 줄라서다 다샹이가 랭원은 개완 줘야 마이 봐 디실 때네 랍도 개완 줘서 거도와 다시 개완레 셴베 개와 샤그도와 땡진 레버는 줘야 개와디 엄마 땡겨셔야 돼야지 다시 개와는 누구요 말해 다시 개와드는 강가 랑원도 좁아 캐랭게 좁아 개와셔야 되더라 땡진 레버는 줘야 개와디 다게야 말해 샹게야 말해 그디스 유는 레버 개와디 요 말와 망보셔서 교단 개초는 레버지만 통고를 시거라 그디스 유는 요 말에서 시거도 다게 요 말해 샹게스도 랑원도 좁아 규샹을 되는 랑원도 좁아 레버 샹게와 요 말해 코란 교단 개소선 루브르도야 태양부레스 제말 루브르 아레마도 랑와체니 수템바 마레스 셰그도 근데 교메 발레테네 개아데데 텔리요 마도 간지 교메 바도 원주 줄라서다 다시니 갈래 원은 개완 유아 많이 봐 근데 간데스레스다 땡진 레버는 주에 개와레스고도 땡진 레버는 주에 개와데 타시날 만두게 개와 셰그도 자자디 타시날 강가까네 다 개와요 마레스 까고 마레스 랑와도 주베 개와 캐는 게 대선 된대요 말에서 다 가르스네 교단께 속발라 땡진 되네 아니 데부치 루부도 개가 그래서 랑와도 마루베 교단께 할때는 데부디 기가 얼마도 랑와도 주베 교단께 할때는 개와데 땡진 데버를 중에 개와라데 용고요 말해 교단께 라 땡진 되네스도 코나 처네 아니 루부도 야태 용고도 와 랑와제 가와요 랑원에 주베 개제 개면도 와 현다가 주에서 라마 매바시 루브르도 태용고도 어디도 가서라 아주 남들 값서 연구해봐 디치리 메달레 동해시라 동해와 인데서 동해와 인데 메다바세 그다 kenjiwa 그거 유라신 게지 손자 라와의 당이도 주바 연구 말에서 시기도 Teaching medal Tungel and the Tamesos. Let the Yamu be Shawan in Medal Vachilia, Rawando Trubata, Galatani Trubeta, Rawando Trubachi, Yoma Resis, Sungudua. Oh, God. Oh, when I go on, teach it, then they have to go on, you share some, or teach you love now. Oh, teach, yeah.
So here, again, this uses the example of a rice seedling, a sprout, but this can be applied to any sort of outer and inner phenomena. So again, picking up on the text, unlike essentialists, consequentialists do not assert that all effects, like sprouts or anything else, any sort of inner and outer phenomena, arise from causes such as the above mentioned four alternatives. So here, again, they don't accept, consequentialists don't accept any sort of production that arises from a kind of cause that is autonomous or existent in its own right. So some sort of self-production or a production from another that is like unconnected or not connected with that particular result, not from some kind of permanent cause. We'll get into the sort of alternatives. But rather they assert that an effect arises newly and suddenly from a stream of its specific, ever-changing causes to which it is linked. So this is the kind of production that is asserted by consequentialists, that is the sort of coming about of a result from this ever-changing stream of specific causes to which they are linked. So when the causes and conditions come together, if we create the causes for something, then the result is going to come about, regardless of, say, whether we hope for it. So we can see, like, there are times where people maybe put a great deal of hope in something. They're like, oh, I really hope this comes about. But that's not really what's going to affect it. Rather, if you accumulate all of the causes and conditions, that's what will bring about a good result or bring about the result. Like, for example, there are some people who, when they have to take a test, they think about, like, oh, I really want to do well on this test, and are kind of thinking about that. Whereas if they just studied well, if you accumulate the proper kind of causes, you're going to get the good result that you want. So here it is, again, based upon that accumulation of the particular causes and conditions that brings something about, not any of the kind of production from these four alternatives. So Chandrakirti then is quoted here. Chandrakirti states in his Entering the Middle Way, composite phenomena do not arise causelessly from a cause such as a divine creator or from both themselves and others. They arise dependently. So again, he eliminates the kind of causeless production, like that which is asserted by the Charvakas or the sort of hedonists, or some kind of divine creator, whether it's Ishvara or Brahma or whatever it may be, or some kind of cause like permanent time or a sort of general principle. Here, all of those kinds of alternatives are rejected. So any of the four alternatives. Now, again, there were some we saw earlier, like of those previous scholars in Tibet who thought that when refuting production from the four alternatives, one needs to apply the kind of qualifier ultimately. So there's ultimately no production from self, ultimately no production from another. But that's not the kind of understanding of Je Lama Tsongkhapa and his spiritual sons, but rather that these four alternatives are representing the kind of cause existing from its own side. So it is that sort of, there's no production from a self that exists from its own side or in its own right, or from another that has that kind of autonomous existence in its own right. Nor is there production from both of those, a self and other, or causelessly. So here there are those that would think then that this kind of, those four alternatives contain every potential kind of production. And so in refuting those four alternatives, one is refuting production in general. However, that's not the way that it should be understood. As we see here in this quotation, that this kind of arising dependently, interdependent origination, that type of production doesn't fall into those four extremes. It's not in any of those four alternatives. As it says at the last line, they arise dependently. Composite phenomena don't come from any of those four alternatives, but rather they arise when the kind of causes and conditions conditions come together for their production. So this is a kind of production that is outside of those four types. It's not self-production in the sense of something like existing in its own right that is able to give rise to itself, or existing from another that is somehow autonomous and existent in its own right. But rather, it is that things are dependently originated existence from their own side or in their own right. But rather it is by the bringing together of those particular causes and conditions, this kind of adventitious process, that we have results come about. So here in the Pramanavartika by Dharmakirti, there's an explanation of how because things are impermanent and therefore suffering, they also lack this kind of autonomous sort of self. So when we're talking about refuting production from the four alternatives, one should understand that it's production in the sense of the cause and effect existing in their own right, from their own side, having that kind of inherent existence. And dependent origination is a kind of production that is outside of any of those alternatives.
Oh yeah. That's it. Then they get answer. She not the bottom of the shade so good and can't let any keep it into the shade. And the gen do much should come jelly come gang, then did the shade. Chir then they get answer. Uma thank you alone the shema top and do sell attend to shave at some my but that's all didn't to jail then the shade. I know should come jet then to shave us and do the much should come jet then to shave your then the chi want to china then you want to china. Then she but the right kitchen good and can't chip bullet then give a little good you are my rachera. Then she but the right kitchen do jet and the shade run good and can't then your share would know. That chita then the shade then she but right kitchen a good chip bullet temper my imbarchera. Rank chashes so Korea came on the comparison of Koda gave one sick but not tall sober. Savalas over Mambu Yorda. Oh, didn't stand of Chigina go Pumbungalas over the Dashi Mambu Yorda. Oh, the nation don't have China Cochasha Mambu Yorda. Could I gain tempers on my baranga chashes or Dashi dance or the chashes to the Dashi Sigora? Hataxa Shirif Chikorva. Dashi sober than Semda Soat and the Shilla sober Dashi Rigorda. Oh, God, I can't want to solve what is a kanga, can't be the shitty order. Or Tina Shiko, Bumbadis in their cut and shoved down Toada, Chita now the kanga to some the shitty order. The shit and dog jiggy tanya ten, dog jiggy tanya should do, try to ming the da, and it did some sort of longy with the cigar. Try tanya to low tanya's new river. Dog jiggy tanya say, to the chef you don't never see ya soon. That the Mingsi Tower or the Pumbasis Laksharno. Pumbasla, I teach him I take a course, Tambudas and get the Pumbasla goes and Pumbasla. It's a match of Pumbala the Shandati Tons or Pumba Pumbase, Pumba Onyamba Loki, Pumbashiba try love to take Janjan Condora. The Letanyese. Mobocona tree the men a carnage Lapsha doesn't go, Dada go to ye, so ta. Dici in the Mamares Kaga Kotovek. So go to ye. Radan Topan Utilistore, Tradilisora, and it is a kibet over Tanya Tanyas. Tanya let them bada. Oh, Parisurita Buyas. Don't you can't get over Cambaricina, Rang Chashel attend the Tabara. Oh, Pumbadis in the Chashel attend, Kansai and Chashel attend the Tabara, Esagora. Parisurita Buse, the Parisuris in the Yanko, then did a chill Tigara. Pachu Pajol then get the Nazu said that Suri Richiona, Sujo Risigra, Sujo read the Tange Pajo Ridella, Parisigra, so Tessali to the Parisuris, Parisuris, Tony Paris, to Medua, the certain Jew Tony Parisuri to Goda. Parisurita, Ringdon said, Rimbuton said that. Chile to the Korean Buchaga, Chile to the Kotong Sandora, Chile turn a don't see Kodamato, Korean Bush, Tawaris, Buddha, the Chiamato, Tondu in a Tawaris, Tondu Sigmato, Shandajil de Sunaco, Rimbuchadora. Rimdunta would remain like a pension, tenpa yuebe se, pari surli drawa ke yuwa marwa, rindung da chi chung la sokwa da, da da shen la sokwa, tazun drawa ke mene ko chi chi la teni sha kwe yuwa re sung yuwa ra, sik yuwa re. Pensu tenpa yuwa la se, yung sheba yang se ten se de la, gyudan ken li ten de komu go che takshi da, eni yang dremi la yang chik chi li teni yuwa re che ra. Yung sheba de kiawa chikbu koko ma re se ra, eni kari kure se na, drupa da, lo yudu drupa, lo yudu yungwa, lo yudu hongwa, tinti cha che kure. Hongwa se, drupa se kira, di lo yudu drupa, lo yudu hongwa se, tinti li cha kire. Drupa la yang jukpe se, tenchen debra jungwa chan jukpa yangpe wandu che na, duchen duma che ki chu tamche, tenchen debra jungwa ino se, dakshida, dokje la tenchen, tetan drene drupa shechi rete warwa. O tenchen duchen duma che ki chu tamche, rangi dakshida, dokje la tenchen drene drupa re se, tela tenche si wara. O chida yinpa de tsashi, ya de tsashi de long de transhen de wara. Teacher tenju mayimbe, kanshir tenju mayimbe, chunga yoba mayimba, teacher tongba mayimbe, chunga yoba mayino sondwa. Tenjin debara chunga mayimbe, lakshidang doje la tenjin debara chunga mayimbe, chunga yoba mayimba, teacher rangune trube tongba mayimbe, chunga yoba mayino sondwa. Oh ya, tiba chitana. Modocha satandi.
So here we turn to the section on the general meaning of dependent arising, because up until here we had talked primarily about the kind of dependent arising of composite phenomena. But here it's not just composite phenomena that are dependently arisen or dependently originated, but rather it applies to non-composite phenomena as well. So here it says consequentialists do not qualify only composite phenomena as dependently arisen. Rather, they describe all phenomena, composite and non-composite, as dependent arising. Non-composite things are phenomena are things like space, in the sense of the lack of near obstructive context. In this broad meaning of dependent arising, dependent does not only mean dependent on causes and conditions that give rise to the effects, but also dependent on a basis of imputation, its parts and so forth, and dependent on the conventional terms and concepts that are the tools of imputation. So here, when we are talking about dependent origination, it's not just the things arise from causes and conditions, but rather it refers to the process of designating on a basis of designation or basis of imputation. Like, for example, a house, this collection of walls and windows and a roof and so forth. On that basis, one can designate house, or the person being designated on the collection of the aggregates. So on the collection of parts of something, making that particular designation through term and concept. So here, like if you have a particular shaped clay thing, those accumulation of particles, one can designate the term pot, for example. And so when one puts the name on something, again, we have like a term, a name that we're designating with, and then there's the concept. So say when one first designates, oh, this is a pot, then once you have, say, shared that word with others, then you don't actually have to be in the presence of that particular kind of object. You say pot, and there's a mental concept that comes up of what that term refers to. And so this is what we're referring to with the basis of imputation and the thing imputed on that. When you can understand that as being an individual thing, that thing which is imputed on a particular basis, this applies to all phenomena. Like a house is designated on a particular basis, a collection of parts. A person is designated on a particular collection of parts. And so all phenomena are dependently originated in that sense of being imputed upon a particular basis of imputation, a particular collection of parts. And so here, this understanding of dependent origination also refers to the mutual dependence of causally unconnected things, such as the near hill and the far hill, or short and long. So here we can have things that are sort of contingent upon one another, although not causally connected. Like when we are standing in one place and we say, oh, that's the far hill, well, that's dependent upon where we are and what is near to us. Or when we designate long and short, something isn't just inherently short, isn't inherently long, but rather it is in dependence, contingent upon something else. So we can posit one as being long or short. There's no sort of causal relation between the two, but there is this kind of mutual dependence. So the kind of word arising here in terms of dependent arising or dependent origination not only means production in the sense of coming from causes and conditions, but is also understood as existence or establishment. So therefore, from the viewpoint of this broader sense of the term dependent arising, consequentialists assert that all phenomena, composite and non-composite, are dependent arisings, in the sense that this broader sense encompasses all phenomena. It's not that things just arise or come about due to causes and conditions, but their establishment, their being an object of mind, is based upon this process of designating independence upon a particular basis of designation. So that kind of dependent arising, coming as an object of mind, can apply to composite and non-composite phenomena. So therefore, from his fundamental verses on the middle way, Nagarjuna says, since there is no phenomena that is not dependently arisen, there is no phenomena that is not empty. So here, this understanding of dependently originated or dependently arisen encompasses all phenomena. Therefore, all phenomena are empty.
Oh yeah. Tene tenjin debar juwase. Tenjin debar juwase ba rangi chashe so dakshiam dakshila tene dedan debar luidu trubam. Luidu hoa ese chogware. Yu koran chane shebena dakshitan drene luidu ndroa mado koran jangjan chi ndroa chike yo mardo. Luidu hoa ese chogware. Luidu ndroa se. Lo koran gwende chane dakshila tene luidu hoa. Yuki ngune shana dakshila tene luidu ndroa sera. Luidu truba amu honshin ndroa da. Rangi dokjila tene truba njoa la se. Dokji ki tanyen la tene tiwangi truba shaguyo da. Dakshitila tene ane dokji ki dichichi res pa takba. Tetsamliya yudi yeba shagu res yora. Yana rangi chashe so dakshiri ne kardo. Dakshir sunwa la tene se. Dakshir sunwa la tene dokji ki takba la tene truba la ya jo rungo se. Rangi chashe so dakshir la tene ane wa dakshir la tene dokji ki tanye lo degi suran dokji ki tanye be lo degi pa titiri pa agare don. O de takba la tene truba tela ya tenjin debar juwa sha chogre se. Dokji ki tanye la tene truba la ya jo rungo se. Tedar shingda tabu rangi chashe kolo so dakshir shene tokwe de shingda o she tanye takba te samji shingda truba ta yebe chu sokba yebe se. Da tanda shingda tangi ma ine shingda pechane kolo chen raya de tinre pecharo. Da tengsa ine kambuja ta namru da tezul chanda tanda maa kote re doa. Chala mambu shibichi yora. Namru reshine tina chashet pe tongda mambu hijira. Lega chengi mambu yora. O tezul la tenje ene namru sipa mingji ta sera. Ente namla purdu namru purke do sera tare. Da ina namru sidi pakwa reji tosna opi namru reshas pa tagira. Nalo devi na namru tagira o ti namru re ta namru na teyo sam tagira. Tina ko chilo ngazo pakwa de tong degira nalo mashinji da ke tongu yo mara. Sa tezo le tene pa takwa samki namru tupsi tsohre. Tina lega chega de mangbu yora tezo re lega cheba de namru lega cheba ndogora. Chawa cheba ndogu yora. Re na namru ke re de yo maro do. Dakshi chashe re ne namru re yo mare. Tesu Mayingeji Namdu Yingenji Kayo Mare. Taine Tesu Kanga Lega Cheba, Namdu Lega Cheba Shakura, Koran Namdu Manati Lega Cheba, Namdu Lega Cheba Shawdo, Namdu Dugudu se Tegudu Sera Yaja Sera Made Setu Machine Chedera. Sanko Kanga Chashela Tenji Rel Nepa, De Namdu Res Patavore. That again Drigwachore. Namdu Yimba Sosare, Tanya do you sit here? She chashes then the number rest Ming Danga the number Ming Tower. And in Mikanga the number rest Taga number two so armado. Then I talk about some. Pigay engage chicken medoa. Now lodge and number did rest chashes rich and it's Yomara Chala don't Kazuna machine Kazuna. In a tesol ten Pagwala ten Takashe machine tenetane the number rest by Ming Taviora. Talk about this some the number two suits over it. The number is all Russia number do the thunder run to us and Russia mother. The number carries the dress and Jidemba mid December Tanda Medusera. Sembatanda Megas and Charges. Tanya do you do the targets over it? Then it talk about some the shower said the theory. Tanya do you steer? Tanya do your boss and Jidem Tanya do you Sera. You take it simple over it. Tanya Joanga showers and dogs you dog work. Chashachilitene. Jigden Yongdal Mingji Trasar, Tewanka, Shagwatism, you call you to over it. Simbache water. A tele devas, the Kavayo says, and you come at it. Tanya do you sit it? Madame Majebo, you said the Tiri, Jigden Tanya do you say. Jigden Tanya Lechebache Yomare. Tanya said to the Taka de Resanane, go be Sambatanda Megasul Chara. Oh, Tin Ducasore. In Jideng Tanya do you sura? That Rangwine to a Yensanata, or Tanya Tawas a Mare, Namdu Rangwine Yoresana. Rangwe do that teacher and Tadangazichan, Namdu 10 and talk about some dressa. Chashet and Doji, let any talk about some to Shaswa. That 10 and talk was a Mare Koran when a Chawachi gets you yogo resana. That Chita, Puruatan Teba, the Chawachi get yora. Chawaching number in dear is a chill is also Sakayo Mara, Rangune. A Rangune Yona, Ramando Yona, that out in Sene Yokore. Sene Takavire. Did I Pakaravan, did my Shindiran, did there, that number one a caress now, oh, did a dash at Yona, near Rangune Yosura, Kurangune Yosura. And then Zuzu Sakayo Mare. There's all a 10 part Tawamado, Rangune Meduna, 10 a Tawasam Sigora. Ogbe wangi shagwase, Tanya wangi shagwase. Namdu yima indi, Taxichil tene, Tanya be, Tratan Togwe party, Chires, and Taget Simbachevora. Taget Yuzu orange, then Tanya do use it, Yema used to Tagata Chevora. A Rangune Yona, that's any Ravore. Koramado Trubachina, Dimareta, Kawaramado Trubachi, Legation Namdu Rawan, the Kawayos, and Yemedua. But Tina should show some jealous or Marazu Dan of China, so put on Sem that so that the sheet that in the Mamudo Wachasha. There's only 10 any part big trashy to do this Patagua, so Gangachi in some good one. Yes, some mother Dangas and Namjunga Samlana, so round or Jiva some good one. So Pasha, Sem Pasha, Swa Pasha, and the Shipasha, Tandangachi, some sort of strength. Tell us wrong when you draw us, quotation. Tara Mabu Yosho, Sida, Rawan to Druba, Rangun Druba, Rangle Druba, Nangaranga Yosam Sandua. O till he had turned down by Yoba, Rangun Yoba, Tina, that's any Rakure. Sene Takarimba said, Nekasheke, Sinshi, Namshi Teresa, Kashe Bungaga Teresa, Kashe Namshi Maritina, Tak was engaged, Rawan Shandaji or a taxi Rawan and the tie or a Sarah. Nambalina. Chidamo the Pumbunga Nane Nagari Tai said. Nikashis Namarati, Sem the Tai said. Simzamboina, Kushinam Shingati said. Shadaga Yigi number she was a Tialan, Dronganam Shish or Tita said. In the shadow. Take you to the Tendisha, I gave your mother. What did you love not among Duchess?
No. So here, continuing in the text, it says, thus the term dependent arising applies to all phenomena, because all phenomena are dependent on their basis of imputation, their parts and so forth, and then are established as an object of the mind in relation to that basis of imputation, and independence on imputing terms and concepts. So here, again, things are established by mind. They're established as an object of mind through this process of a mind designating through term and concept on a particular basis of designation. This is that. But there's no establishment from the side of the object in its own right. That mere designation encompasses the extent of existence of phenomena. So here, it continues by saying, in other words, it refers to phenomena being dependent on their parts and so forth, being apprehended as the basis of imputation, and then being established independence on imputation by terms and concepts. And this encompasses the extent of the existence of any sort of phenomena. There's not something that we can find beyond that kind of designation. So for instance, the establishment or existence of a carriage, of a chariot, is completed when you identify its parts on which are apprehended as the basis of imputation, and then conceptually impute to them the conventional designation carriage. Therefore, a carriage is established in dependence both on its parts and imputing terms and concepts. So, of course, I like to use this example of a carriage or a chariot, but we can use anything as an example, like a computer or an airplane. Like we think about an airplane, it's something that has all kinds of different parts. And we, say we see the outside of a plane, we see something that is flying through the sky, and we designate, oh, that's an airplane. But if we were to try to search beyond that, to look for something within all of those thousands of parts that make up a plane and say, that is the plane, this really is it, there's nothing that we can find, nothing that we can point to. We can't find the plane in the individual parts. It's not like a plane exists in each of the individual parts, but based upon that collection of parts and designating, oh, that is an airplane, we can talk about an airplane flying, we can talk about riding on an airplane and so forth, and all of that encompasses the extent of the existence of that plane. So that suffices for its existence as being something that is merely dependently designated. We don't need to search beyond that for something that exists in its own right or exists from its own side. So here again, when we are looking for something like an airplane, again, it's something that is merely designated on the basis of designation, all of these thousands of parts, and we designate something, oh, this is a plane, and we need to be satisfied with that. That is the extent of the existence of the plane. If we're to search instead for something that exists from its own side, that really is that airplane, that's existent in its own right, if that were the way the plane existed, we would have to be able to find it, but we can't find or can't point to anything beyond merely being designated by a term and concept that encompasses the existence of, say, a plane. So something this is really when we are looking for the type of conventional existence of phenomena, we're looking at a level where we're not analyzing and investigating. If one were to look within a particular basis of designation, within the particular parts, to try to find that thing that one could point to as really existing as that particular designated phenomena, then we can't actually find it. And so one needs to be satisfied. The level, the extent of existence of phenomena is that which is merely posited by thought. If something had that kind of autonomous existence from its own side, we would have to find that thing that we could point to, that we could identify as really being the thing designated, but it doesn't exist. So our self is like this. On the basis of these aggregates, we designate a self, we designate a person, and we have this sense of there really is this autonomous this truly existent in its own right kind of self here on these aggregates. But when we look for that thing, look for this thing that exists ultimately or that exists extrinsically, exists in its own right, there's nothing that we can point to posit as being that self. Now, there are some schools that would say it's the sort of mental consciousness that is the self or is the person, or it's the collection of all five of the aggregates, or it's the continuum of the mental consciousness, or like the mind-only school posits a foundational consciousness as being the basis of that person. But really, according to the Prasangikas, the extent of the existence of the person is encompassed by it being merely designated by term and concept. There's nothing beyond that that can be found or posited to exist as the self.
Oh yeah, dan dichilamna kashin rungti tako. Dan dichilamna ne chiksele sungudwa. Uma chikse kapsu sungudwa, dawa draba kirwa. Chandar kirti wa di sungudwa, kar sungdusna. Dewe na lobyo namji penji teba zambi kone truba number shawa jadose. Uma be lobyo namjirwa. Dakshi dan chashe tezola tejin drene. Löfa takwa zamliya ne ko yeba shabyo res. Tanya de yuchiti sungwara. Lobyo namji penji teba zambi truba number shawa jadose. Dini te kona dar khelang urese. Ta na shin jigdengi tanya de yuchiti tina shi tene takwa zamli shawar mado. Ta tse ne tina ne kadiresin diresi nye yeba shaya yo mare sungwara. Dini te kona dar khelang bar shadese. Ye mayina ane kunzub rege mare. Tanya do yusudu taga zamli shaware. Kunzu do yusudu te zamli shaware se. Tse ne chi shasuna te kunzu mare te tendam truba rege suwara. Teta mayina kunzub teba dan demba mayi se. Tse ne chi shawayina ane te tendam ba truba shawara. Tanya do yueba dan kunzub do yueba se de mata maja bapa tene takba te zamla pa shaw mado tse ne nye ya dan tende yueba si shagi yuwa mare sungudwa. Techilamna.
No. So here, from the master Chandrakirti's clear words, he explains that therefore the masters, the sort of Madhyamaka masters, present establishment or existence, present the sort of establishment of things as being merely established by way of mutual contingency or by interdependence. And this is what one should undoubtedly accept, just like that. So that which is conventionally or phenomenally existent is posited to exist without any kind of further investigation. This is the measure of conventional existence. If it were not like that, if there were some kind of existence that one could point to, that could identify as being really that thing beyond merely designated as such, then actually the conventional would not be tenable. It would not be tenable to posit that as conventionally existent. If upon searching you were able to find something, that thing would be ultimately existent. It would be sort of existent in its own right. So here Chandrakirti is asserting that whatever is posited as establishment or existence is that which is merely mutually contingently established. That's what Madhyamaka masters know as existence.
Oh yeah. Muti uma jugba rangti kapso tane shi sungudwa. Number cheba chena ne kunzum nyamduru. Jidengi tanya do ye kunzum do ye sade nyamduru. Kanse bigi namduru se namdu kadire se chegando na. Tin jiden tanya reguma tanya nyamduru. Kunzum do ye se nyamduru. Mata macheba sam shawra. Ore se tawa chashandru era. Chega chene de chigimba che nyeke mendo chene tawa shawre sera. I mashane jiden ben tanya nyamduru. Zeni chi shaba ine tanda yoba shara madon tanya to yoba da kunzu to yoba shawa de mare songdwa. Namba cheba chena ni jiden be tanya nyamban yudish. Je tanya do yuchu de mada majebe kone shawa re songdwa. Ya tijilana.
So also from Chandrakirti's auto commentary to the entry to the middle way, he explains that if you investigate, when you're sort of looking at the conventions of the world, those things that are merely designated, if when you investigate there were to be something that could be found, then that if you posit something findable within those designations, then actually the conventions of the world degenerate. They are only only conventional existence is only posited when one is not investigating and analyzing. If you are to posit that there is something findable when one searches, that actually would cause the kind of conventional to degenerate.
뭐야? 어떤 바요나 아니 제제여도 요거라 랑위네요나 간사 고라 랑위네요나 고랑 뭐네지요나 현달의 뜻인 전에 샤모저 강가랑 요새는 뭐지 그 딱서가 제서가 지요나 딱 제제는 제버체는 라고로와 어디 연안이 던다 뭐여 봐서 그래서라 이 마시게벤 저번에 용도 하면 나와자고 그러 주변 넘버 제바나 아니 옹보이네다 유이네다 간사이네다 수이네 랑ging 어디라고 말해 송거래 주변 넘버 제바나 유남리아 넘버 제바 가서라 유디라고 말해서 뭐 매베서 팀 매버데가 랑ging 뭐에 주변 매베터래 제바체네 피게 제가 치네 랑원에 주변 누구다면도 랑원에 주변 연에 가들에서 제와이나 라고 말했을 때 매버데다 랑원에 매베던다래 매베던다 말해 예 마요세데 등이 탕했다 하는 마다 마제바 탕했다서 다가 여바샤 그래 단다 제네 치스네 랑원에 여바세 탄다래 송거라 걔들은 랑게 뭐 주바 주나니 대세 태변 넘버 제보나 체세와라 랑게 뭐에 요나 태죽지르베 제바진 가데레서 봐 제바체스나 세바체제 어디레 세제 라야시요 그래 송거라 이번에 미국 주와신테 미국 말에 대선자 랑신지 주와메스 또다 제바체네 라야신도나 테 랑신지여래 랑외네 연에 제바체네 라야도 여고래 랑외네 랑와도세 랑가랑 요세라 그랑외네 여바세네 다 카드 효과된 바스는 근데 레레네 제네 라고래서거라 뒤탄다 바요나 랑외네 연에 랑신지여네 제네 라야데 여고래 얘네 딱 봤으면 지금 당연히 요즘에 딱 제시는 요구 말해서 뒤에 개봐 당연히 요즘다 랑외네 주바 요즘 가가선 거다 ting이랍나
So here again from Chandrakirti in his commentary to Aryadeva's 400 verses explains that if when you are investigating for the thing so designated, if you were to find something, if something were to exist in a way that it existed from its own side, existed in a way that it's able to sort of bear analysis, if that thing were ultimately existent, then it would have to be findable upon that kind of search within the basis of designation. So if you posit that there is something findable, then that thing would have to be ultimately existent from its own side, sort of able to bear analysis. And when you search for that thing that exists from its own side, that exists in its own right, or that has that kind of inherent existence, and you can't find that, that does not negate the sort of mere existence of something, but rather that is negating, you're not able to observe something that has that sort of existence from its own side. So here again, one needs to be clear about what it is that one is searching for in this kind of analysis. The sort of level of conventional existence, when one doesn't examine or analyze, is not undermined by searching for the thing that is ultimately existent. But when one doesn't find such a thing that is ultimately existent or existent from its own side, that means that it's only merely sort of conventionally existent. So here it's important to distinguish between the kind of existence from its own side. If you're analyzing and searching for that and don't find it, you don't actually negate the mere existence of that thing.
지대메 당연히 냠도를 라고 말해서 라에시오 말해서 당연히 지게도 돌려서도 돌롱장도 페르나싱다 귤에 대전에서 잠녀서라 잠녀들의 땅에서도 싱지어는 들려 다른 레스토랑에서라 싱다 귤에 대전에서 된된들이 장장장장 쓰기도 그러나 싱다 귤에 대전에서도 Singji Gora, and it is Tarji Gora, the Tambo member, Lulu member, Abuchi Gora, Tada's Gora, Lulu Janet, Tata Maret, Tamdana Chedura. When I sing that dole, when I sing the Gula tension as 10 order, and a Lagwacha, and a Lagwa Joash or a sing the Gu Koran Chipu Digmara, Gus the Tar del Cigar, the Cuba del Cigara. We sing the Gula and the Lagba and the Lagwa Gatrushim Bacora, Yabuchi Caption, Trajambu Yungura Kamashin, Yambu Marwa, Lagwacha, Lagwajan Dumane, some Gitsoach or did in the show some Chota, Kujimambu Sanguda. Some Tangore Lagwe Kujoja were Shingdi Abucore, Tarde Abucore, and a Tamias and Yambuto Acere. Sing the Gula tension and Lagbat Soacheva, some Sona, and a Troji Pianlimbula Sole, and a Troji Tato Watchebe, Piwa Tamieda to the Lingburistana, Kana Limbutan Agora, the recent Zubit and the Yungredo, or Troji Pianlimbula Sole. Tadale ne try and join you and a Tanyambo Yawing good Hara. That the Tarasha or a Tanyambo dos Tarasha Zor mother. That tried the Canadian good dos Taja Chega don the Ragma Richera. Then a cable let Tasha is all cable because you tried the Canadian good. You said this Jagusina. There's a tender software than you go, Madon, the name is still Zuzu Sake Ragmardo. Then a cable let Tasha and Esse. Then a cane order. Kawandores, Choda Chozam Namso Tachena, ne try one drawing me, and try the Canadians, the Neon Chassis, your mother, Drossa de Yetsa Kawandores and Drossa Tank, your mother. Then they saw some the Lubur to Yungoro, Lubur to Melchare, Sigurda. Oh, teach them and do that.
So here then, from Chandrakirti's auto commentary to the entry to the middle way, he says again, if one investigates, if you try to investigate the conventional with this kind of reasoned analysis, then those conventions of the world degenerate. You can't actually find the thing. So for example, it gives a quote then from the sutras where it says, for example, in dependence upon the wood and the strings and the effort of a hand, these three coming together, you have something like a noisemaker, like a piwang, a violin, or sort of like a little guitar, or a flute. And from the arising of, from those three things coming together, you have this kind of sound that comes about. So again, when you have like an instrument, like a piwang or a little guitar sort of thing, you need to have the wood and the strings. And again, all of this has to be set up right. There are many causes and conditions. You can't just have them be really sort of too loose to not have any tension. You can't have it be too tight. And then one needs to have not just the sort of instrument with the wood and the strings, but also the effort of the hand. And the effort of our hand, the sort of skill of the hand, comes from a mental intention, saying like, oh, I'm going to pluck these strings. And so there are all of these causes and conditions. When those come together, you can have noise come forth from an instrument like a piwang or like a flute. Again, that might have different causes and conditions, but you know, the blowing of a flute. And so from the aggregation of those causes, you have the sound come about. But there's nothing that you can point to beyond like saying, oh, there's a beautiful sound. If you were to try to look, like searching for, well, where is that sound? Where does it come from? Where does it go? This quote from the sutra continues by saying that if someone sort of skilled started to investigate, to try to see, well, where does that sound come from? Where does it go? Looking in all directions and all sort of intermediate directions, they can't actually find the coming or going of the sound. And so the existence of the sound that comes forth from that instrument is a mere designation. When you try to search for that thing, it sort of dissipates. You can't actually find it. So the conventional, again, exists at this level of being unanalyzed, unexamined. But if you were to search for something deeper, it's like trying to look for, well, where is the sound coming from a guitar? Where does it come from? Where does it go?
Oh, yeah. I'll do it. Oh, yeah, that's good. The Darshing data was stashing data, Namdula Sova Karina, Computer Sov Karina to the Chibara, Rangi Chashe, Kolola Sova, Dakshiri Chede, Toben dishing the washi, Tawasam dishing the Trubaresera, Yeve Suits over Res, Tesam Tanya do you to over. Rangi Chashe dan Dojila Turnishing the Truba in Oce. Deshin dose, Chokanga Chibara. 대신 람도 들어왔다고 다 람도 들어왔으나 람과를 누구 연애로 그냥 맞추는 경고래네 그렇게 주제 람과 누구여라 람도 들어와서 가와래서 쟤는 얘기 람도 누구도 와서 누구도 다가 차샤오는 다 간데스 누구도 들어와들 람과 되어르베 아니 강발이 요르베 간사들 요르베 교과들 요르베서 지센세 개가 말에 텐디 소군론도 제 람과도 제 우당서에 되는 구조를 겹친 러시아 요라 대샤오르마도 다제다 제주도에 개가 말이잖아 대지 람도 로아강에서 람라 요르다 간사들 요르다 강발 요르다 강발 야자에들 요르다 마샤에 텐데스나 라와도 들어버지 요나 텐데지 요코라 주사지 딱 쇠바 지요나 리베 딱제 전에 딱 쇠바 라 제쇠바 제바전에 제바 쇠통게 지요나 디레스요라 딱쇠 제바전 라고면도 딱 메쇠바 제 메쇠바라 딱제 전에 요 말에 제바전에 요 말에세 디스거라 랑게 차셔던 도질을 때에 신다 주바게 넣어서 어떠한 실례진 남든 로 다들 찍버리시래 레진 람든 로알라 람다 콤반데 조다 레진 간사소를 때네 레진 람든 로시 딱 봤삼기 레진 람든 로아 누구도선 다가 좋아라 누구도 샤샤오르마다 역시단 도실라 때네 주바른 조발레 셴도 레진 라와시 람든 로아보 디도아데시 라와시 로에요 마레시라 제된 로아 라와시 요나 다 레진 데레다 공반denjo 데레다 람레요르다 가와요르스네 라야요 마레세 어디네 시르 송도 하야 디질락시 그래
So here, then again, like whatever kind of object we want to use, whether it's a carriage or a computer or a plane or whatever, when we talk about any of these, the establishment or existence of a carriage is completed when you identify its parts, which are apprehended as the basis of imputation, and then conceptually impute to them the conventional designation carriage. Therefore, a carriage is established in dependence both on its parts and on imputing terms and concepts. And that really encompasses the entire extent of the carriage's existence. And so this is true for all phenomena, any kind of phenomenon, like taking the example of Devadatta walking on the road. With respect to the example of the Buddha's cousin Devadatta walking on the road, his walking is established by merely imputing Devadatta is walking on the road. Independence on Devadatta, the road, the lifting up and placing down of his feet, and so on. So when we, like if we're an old person, say, walking along the road, and you've got like your cane, and you're pushing and lifting up your feet and setting them back down, if you want to try to find, well, what is the going? What is the action of walking there? Well, does it exist in the road? Is it existent in the sort of lifting up and setting down of the feet? Is it existent in the person, in the movements? There's nothing that you can find and point to as being that is the walking, the act of walking. There's nothing that exists from its own side, like autonomously, independently, that is able to bear scrutiny, to withstand analysis, that we can point to and say, this is the walking. But rather, it is something that is merely dependent upon these various causes and conditions, as well as the act of imputing that on a particular basis of designation. So here, other than this establishment of Devadatta's walking, independence on the basis of imputation and the imputing terms and concepts, where is there an independent action of Devadatta walking? There isn't. So if you were to search, if there were such an independent action of walking, then its ontological status would not be encompassed by merely imputing Devadatta is walking on the road. It would necessarily exist in its own right. But here, there's nothing that can be found that exists in that way, other than something being merely designated on its basis of designation.
Don't talk about because walk at the door, what in a shelter. What is around this one?
No, no. So here again, if there were some kind of independent activity of walking or independent action of walking, then there would have to be something that could be found within the basis of designation, within the various actions, the road, and so forth. But there isn't anything that can be found. So here, this is refuted as well by Nagarjuna in his fundamental verses on the middle way, where he goes through this, looking at if there is something that could sort of exist as that thing that could bear scrutiny, it should be able to be found. But other than something that is merely designated on a particular basis, we can't speak of any other sort of existence of that act of walking. So in this manner, the fundamental verses on the middle way refutes this findability after it analyzes whether this walking exists in the road, in the movement of the feet, and so on.
Oh yeah, that is also.
Mm-hmm. So we'll stop there for today as time is up.
We'll finish with some dedication prayers.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I praise. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Losang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guru Mandalakam Niyatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their suffering. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May the born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
So thank you again, Rinpoche, for such precious teachings and inspiring motivations as well. And Katrina, thank you for your clear interpretations. And we'll see everyone here online next week for teachings.
Record. Oh yeah.